By the design of your architecture, Craig, I'm assuming that funding Interpol has its own sets of headaches, looking at the wide geographical covering that you have to, and you're dealing with different individual jurisdictions and laws. Is that a headache? Does that keep you up at night?
It's a challenge. Any organisation, any business, funding is a challenge, and I think the COVID-19 at the moment, on the one hand, it's a threat to all of us from a health point and a pandemic point, but it's also an opportunity as well. So there's an opportunity where we've seen a massive acceleration in people going online. So all of a sudden, there's been about exponentially bang. Not everybody, but a lot of people are now working from home as well. So that brings challenges into it, but also it brings in opportunities. So I haven't worked from home for over a year since I've started at Interpol because of the nature of our work. We're in the office or we're travelling. Whereas now I've been working from home, and if I'm really, really honest, I have not missed the travelling aspect to this. Being able to come down and turn my laptop on and access anywhere in the world, it's been fantastic. But from a project side of things, part of my last role in the United Kingdom was supporting our national cybersecurity programme, and we had a £45 million budget per annum for law enforcement. Now that's even in the UK, that's a serious amount of money. But actually, the United Kingdom were investing 1.9 billion over 5 years into cyber, if you like. Coming into Interpol, yes, we have to look for funding for our projects. But again, with my programme manager head on, I do that on a prioritised basis. So effectively, we've got a number of different priorities and objectives within our programme. So first one is to develop that better understanding of the cybercrime threat landscape. Now we do that with private partners and also with law enforcement. So we have a thing called Project Gateway, which allows us to bring data and information in directly from private partners. We have our own rules of processing data, so we have a separate book which goes through how we have to handle our data. So if anybody knows about ISO and those sort of pieces around data, or GDPR, we have our own rules around that, and we're heavily monitored on that. We have separate departments which audit us, make sure we do it correctly, make sure, as we said earlier, the architecture is correct, we're storing it correctly, and things like that. But we've got sort of private partners. So some of those, for example, are threat intelligence companies. Some of those are from the sort of financial sector, or some of the sectors that might be impacted from cybercrime. So again, we look to utilise those partnerships and that creation of that ecosystem as well, which helps support us.
Right. So let's get back to the trends we talked about earlier on. Yeah. Obviously, phishing has been a common one on the African space. But looking at the work you do, what's the trend like on, say, sovereign or state cyber attacks, and are there lessons that we can learn from countries that have dealt with it better than others?
So I think when we look at sort of nation state attacks, that's an area we don't get involved in. That's a government side. And again, I know different countries are set up differently. So some it's a government responsibility, some it's a dual law enforcement and government responsibility. Certainly, as I said, I came back to our Article 3 around being the neutrality side of it. So we don't get involved with any politics side. We don't get involved, not just the politics side, sorry, on the, I'll try to think of the other things now, military side and things like that as well. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's a very clear definition. So once we get a cyber incident in, we will do an assessment of it. We will support the member country. So it might be a member country comes to us, say, we've got a ransomware attack on our health sector. We will start looking at that. If it comes and looks like it is hostile state or near state actor or government attack, that does not fall within our remit. So very much then we would just revert back to the country and say, look, we can't assist you at this time because we have to maintain our neutrality side of that.
Right. And earlier on, we had a conversation about the development of jurisprudence and the fact that innovation or cyber attacks are developing faster than the laws to curb that. Is this frustrating for you?
So again, we look at, we're dealing with boundaries, aren't we, all the time? So we're dealing with national boundaries within legislation. there's national boundaries. We're looking at trying to harmonise some of the legislation so we can exchange evidence and things like that as well. Because obviously, if the laws are harmonised, then what I would refer to as a cyber attack or theft of data in one country would be the same in another country. So if you have that harmonised, if it's not quite harmonised, that's when it becomes a little bit more difficult for law enforcement to exchange that data and information. And we have a process, an MLAT process, which is like a judicial process that we go through about exchanging data. I know there's a number of sort of conventions that are touted around trying to bring countries together under certain conventions. I know in Africa you're looking at the Malibu one, which is not a convention as yet because I don't think it's been ratified, but also there's the Budapest one. But when you look at these sort of conventions, there's a number of similarities to them, and the United Nations are doing a huge amount of work in that space effectively to try and align that. When it does come back to doing the investigation side and the frustrations, I think, yes, because there is this piece around law enforcement, the courts quite often still sit, don't they? We're still quite paper-based in the courts. So when we look at the digital evidence and trying to present that in a way that, the judiciary understands that, the jury understands that, and, this is going to take quite a while still to develop effectively. When you look at the cycles that we've gone through and the growth just of the networks, the mobile networks, the physical computer networks, and the infrastructure, trying to sometimes unpick that and make that easily understandable in the court process to say, well, actually, who was responsible for pressing that button for that cyber crime? Because who was behind that? And again, coming back to your point about how the growth is that, and when you look at AI, as programs start to develop, and again, I'll stress I'm not an expert in this area, but when you look about how AI is used and the possibilities for AI, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, there's some really good that it can be used for, but potentially there's some other sort of pieces it can be used for as well. So yeah, we here in Singapore have an innovation centre, and they do constantly are doing horizon scanning effectively. So they're looking at seeing, what are the trends, what are the themes that are going on. Digital forensics is one of their main areas. They've just done a very interesting report, or a couple of reports actually, one about best practice in collecting digital evidence and dealing with that from a law enforcement side, and that's available to 194 countries. But also they've just done one for drones as well, which is quite topical at the moment as well. It's not cybercrime per se, but you can just see all the different things that policing and society is having to deal with.
Right. Let's talk about that harmonization of laws. There's been several disputes, especially when you look at blue chip tech companies that are offering services across wide geographical spaces without the need to physically be there. I'll give you an example. There's been a huge debate about should a company like Netflix, for example, pay taxes in Kenya when they really don't have an office in Kenya? Or whenever we have such kind of disputes, then where do you take this and how do you enforce such things? Because most people say, if I'm an organization operating in a space that I'm not wanted, I'll just shut my laptop and go. What is the role of big corporates in fostering an environment for harmonization of laws?
So I think we all have a role to play. We all have to work in a responsible way and in society. When it comes into who's taxed where and things like that, I'm not a taxation expert or anything like that. I think for law enforcement, what we look at is what are the laws that we're dealing with at that particular time within that country effectively, and then we look to enforce those laws on behalf of the society that's serving within those countries. I think you can liken a little bit of this to the COVID situation as well, where a number of restrictions were brought in countries, and the law had to catch up very, very quickly to how could we impose some of those laws or legislation that was brought in. Some of it might have come about because it was already there because of infectious diseases and the Infectious Disease Acts in countries. So again, some of it was already there. But coming back to sort of how the international side does of it, it's about that global infrastructure, isn't it? It is now everywhere. So again, it's not that physical act is created by being in that country physically. It's the virtual side of that as well. And I think that for me is very much a society and government responsibility. Those are the conversations and debates that need to be had at the government level and with industry as well. And then whatever the laws and legislations come out, if there's a sort of judicial side to that and a law enforcement side to that, then we will look to deal with it at that time effectively. But looking how legislation keeps up in the law enforcement terms, within the United Kingdom, we have the Computer Misuse Act 1990. There was some very, very good legislation written at that time. But like anything, as times move on, this is where quite often laws are just added to. So you would have, section 3A. So you have an A added to it, which will add another bit in. So sometimes we do it in a piecemeal approach, because it can be quite difficult to, re-look at those laws and make them fit everything as well. But again, from a law enforcement standpoint, it's down to those member countries to devise those laws and then actually enact those laws through their sort of judiciary and law enforcement capabilities in the countries.
Craig, are there factors that predispose Africa to cyber threats? And I'll give you an example. Lots of speakers spoke in the morning, and we're looking at different data sets, and there are some trends that were interesting and worrying. For example, if you're looking at insider threat, phishing, and different manner of threats, you'd point out countries like South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya as leading in those areas. From the work that you do, what are some of the factors that predispose some of these economies to cyber threats?
I think all the things you've just said there are relevant across the globe effectively. I think what we look at in respect of is that awareness, and that's part of what law enforcement's role is around coming back to protecting the community side of that. So law enforcement in the country now is changing and evolving a little bit in the way they police. But again, a lot of police officers, they join the police to chase after the bad people within their communities. And by their communities, I mean physically. So, a lot of us grew up in the communities we ended up policing in because we wanted to do that.
Right.
In the virtual world, that's quite a different space for us. And for law enforcement as well, we need to, and we are looking at, in fact, what's that policing model like now? How does it look? So do we do and have to do a lot more with the private sector that own the infrastructure, for example? So how can we raise the awareness of the crimes that are being facilitated because of the infrastructure? I'm not picking any companies out in particular. This is about that sort of the internet and, the way that is, glued together through different ways. Then we've got, of course, got all the sort of programs and things like that, which, can have their vulnerabilities in there. So again, we look at the patching side of that. Now, as a police officer, to go out and have this conversation where, yes, you've got to patch, you've got to keep everything updated, two-factor authentication is really important. As cops to go out and have that conversation with communities, it's quite hard for us to do that at times. Another model, and again, so I know I'm referring to a few UK models here, but there's the cyber resilience centres in the United Kingdom, which have been set up. That is a sort of an aggregation between the private sector, academia and policing. The way that sort of model works is they bring together small, medium enterprises that may not be able to afford that high-end protection from cyber attacks. They bring the police in to try and support them around the protection side, but also they bring the universities in because, and I think this is where potentially is a good model in Africa, because we have a lot of people now at universities, at colleges, taking diplomas around cybersecurity, computer science, programming. They're getting some fantastic skills, but then when they come out from universities, the jobs may not be there. So they then look, okay, well, how are we going to use these skills? So one of the parts of that program is to bring those people in that are doing their courses and help them and put them with policing, but also with industry to start looking at, okay, let's see how we can take some small steps to begin with to protect you at a smaller cost. We can give the students some real exposure then to work, if you like, in what they're hoping to do around cybersecurity. So it's a sort of win-win all round effectively. And I know
Right.
that model is being looked at now by a number of different countries as well. And if anybody wants any further information on that as well, I'm happy to provide that for them as well. Because again, part of what our role is here at Interpol is to bring in the good ideas. As I said, that horizon scanning and say, okay, well, hang on, that worked really well, I think, in that country. Let's see if we could bring it halfway around the world and see if it works there. Now, it might have worked well in that country because certain cultural reasons, things like that, and it's just going to, really flop when we take it into that other country. But that's why it's great to have so many people in our team at Interpol being able to look at these things and advise us on that. Because I might think, oh, what a great idea that is, and someone will say, no, Craig, that's never going to work there because they don't have this or this, or that's not a priority. It's like, oh, okay, right. And that's sort of the other factors we need to consider in our sort of international work.
Right. Craig, as we bring this to a landing, I'd like you to look at your crystal ball and just looking at from where you sit, what are the biggest opportunities and challenges as far as the whole cyber crime is concerned, especially on the African landscape?
So I think on the African landscape, that across any landscape, is the data and information is the first one. And I would say that, when we're talking about cyber and the online, it's about getting that data and information collected in a timely manner, and it's relevant to what we're looking at. So understanding that threat picture. And then in the Africa region, for us, one of the things we're really looking to do at the moment is supporting the countries as best as we can by actually making it a priority. So making the cybercrime a priority within those countries. Now, the countries may have different priorities and also different definitions of cybercrime, but if we can access funding or get officers seconded into our regional bureaus from the African countries, look to bring experts on contract in to support them over a 2-3 year model going forward to develop their skill sets. Now, we don't need to take them right up to that top level, or anybody in policing to a degree, where they're doing reverse malware engineering and things like that. That's useful, but industry are really good at doing that. So let's leverage on the industry side of that as well. And then from here in Singapore, we can then look at the cyber criminality and where that's sort of emanating from. We know sort of the Nigeria region is, doing a number of different scams, the organised crime groups. It's not always just on cybercrime, we look around enough of different crime types. So actually looking at criminal groups within Africa and how they're impacting worldwide, but also what's the crime that's impacting in Africa as well? How can we better protect all those users on their mobile phones effectively as well to stop them losing money, when they're using the apps on their mobile phones? I think it's a long journey though, and this is where I'm going to be, put some realism around this. This for me, the program that we're running here, the first iteration was sort of a setting up. We're now moving into a more sort of information, data, intelligence-led focus, and then into the operational side of that. But we've also got to be very mindful about building the capabilities up as we go along as well. But it's a fantastic area to work in, whether you're in law enforcement, whether you're in industry. It's a growing area. You can work from anywhere in the world. Certainly, anybody that's young enough to retrain or has that aptitude, I would wholeheartedly encourage people, to get into the cybersecurity side of things, because for cybersecurity, you can read crime prevention as well. And I think it's important that we sort of marry those two together and sort of utilize the best from each effectively.
Fantastic. Craig Jones, Director for Cybercrime at Interpol. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to enlighten us on what you do. I, for one, I'm excited that, all we knew about Interpol was enforcing arrest warrants on movies, but that's certainly more than that. So thank you very much. And I hope that for a lot of the people who will be listening, there's lots of opportunities for partnering within the local police units and Interpol and looking at making this space a lot safer for everyone. So thank you very much, Craig. I don't know what time it is in Singapore right now, but many thanks for making time.
11 o'clock in the evening, but thank you very much, Bonnie. It's been well worth staying up. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
So if you're watching us, that brings us to the end of this very exciting conversation about the role of Interpol and other law enforcement in making it much safer.